Hey guys, Zane from the Infinite Jukebox here with another quick album review, and today I wanted to talk about the new Blink-182 record, One More Time. When Blink-182 announced the return of ex-guitarist slash vocalist Tom DeLonge last year after his initial departure in 2015, it kind of felt like a bygone era of not just Blink-182, but pop punk in general was suddenly not bygone anymore. I mean, it was the classic lineup back again, the lineup that brought the world iconic pop punk records like Enema of the State, for example. And you know what? Even if I wasn't quite as excited as some people were for the return of the golden era lineup, if you will say I was expecting some pretty decent things from them, at least. I mean, I genuinely do like a lot of the albums that they put out during that time period. I was kind of hoping that they would put out another, at least really solid one. That being said, there definitely has been some interesting history between the time that Tom DeLonge originally left Blink-182 and the time that he rejoined Blink-182. I mean, the guy went on a lot of solo projects, a good variety of them actually, each with sounds that weren't totally related to what he was doing with Blink beforehand, and Blink as a band continued on without him and went in creative directions that I personally thought were terrible, but again, were also wildly unlike anything that Tom was doing at the time or with Blink beforehand. So these two different beasts, Tom DeLonge solo and Blink-182 without Tom DeLonge, they went down different paths, and now that they're back together, their paths are converging once more, and the question was, what would that result in? And One More Time has an answer. It's not a great one, but it's an answer. One More Time does live up to the expectation of being one more go-around for one of the most popular pop-punk bands of all time, but at the same time, it doesn't really feel like the great comeback that it should be or wants to be. Much of the record's production is extremely compressed, to the point that almost every single song on this record feels flat and lifeless, whether that be the more punk-oriented tracks or these more arena-esque sort of like pop-punk melodic punk chorus heavy tracks. There's also a lot of unneeded auto-tune and otherwise electronic processing on both Mark Hoppus and Tom DeLonge's vocals, and it's not necessarily present throughout the entire album, but the tracks where it is definitely shows. As a whole, they definitely don't add any jolt of energy to the record. I mean, even besides the unnecessary, again, processing of their vocals, it also just feels like they aren't particularly interested in what they're doing, and ultimately that's a real shame, because I think this record as a whole could have been, again, a great comeback for a band that was once highly beloved and is now somewhat disgraced by the exact community of punk fans that once, at least to an extent, adored them. One More Time also doesn't really see Blink as a band shine instrumentally in any way, outside of the ever-intense drumming of Travis Barker, but if you're even remotely familiar with them as a band, I don't think I really need to comment on why the guy's a particularly great drummer. I mean, he doesn't need to go as hard as he does on songs like First Date, but he does anyway. And you know what, the same could arguably said here, though as a whole, I don't necessarily think he alone as a performer is enough of a driving force to really sell this album. The songwriting is equally dull as the band bounce between songs like Bad News that are somewhat sentimental but otherwise feel a bit underbaked, and tracks like Turn This Off, the extremely brief Turn This Off might I add, that are trying to sort of, I guess, recapture some of their more immature and jokey songs from earlier on in their career, but it just does not work right now. I mean, if you look at some of the classic Blink-182 songs that fall into sort of the same lane, you have tracks like What's My Age Again, for example, but the thing is that those songs are genuinely good to even great sometimes because they were able to really sell it. In fact, they didn't even have to sell it. It was just them. They were much younger, they were more generally actually immature, and it was just a natural sense of goofiness and obnoxious personality that made those songs work in the way that they did. But here on One More Time, it's obviously not there for them anymore. And while I respect them wanting to have fun with this album instead of forcing something more sophisticated out, it also is weird hearing guys that are my dad's age forcing just these like jokey 20-something-year-old level lyrics out again just for the sake of putting out another record. It feels a bit awkward and it never really lands either. And for anyone who might say that, oh, they've always been like that, have they really, though? I mean, sure, they always maintained, again, a level of immaturity throughout their original run as this particular current three-person lineup, but at the same time, as they entered into the 2000s and did records like their self-titled album, it felt like they grew to an extent, at least. I mean, sure, they were maintaining their roots lyrically and thematically, but nonetheless, it felt like they were growing and changing overall. So, for a lot of that to be reversed on half of this album entirely, while the other half is trying way too hard to completely push that forward, it makes for a bit of a mess. In fact, One More Time feels kind of like the opposite of growth. All of the more sentimental and sentimentality-oriented tracks here feel too forced to come across as genuine, and the more humorous passages here just don't land comedically in any way whatsoever, as they totally lack the obnoxious likability that once really defined them as a band and kind of made them stand out from a lot of their mainstream peers. You know, at the time, at their peak, Blink-182 really did stand out from a lot of the pop-punk crowd within the mainstream because they just felt a lot more self-aware of how goofy a lot of the stuff that they did was. But here on this album, it kind of makes me appreciate Simple Plan and Newfound Glory a little bit more. Not much more, they're still terrible bands, but a little bit more. One More Time isn't the worst comeback that an older-ish band have ever made. In fact, it's not even the worst comeback album from any artist this year alone, but it also is not capable of recapturing what Blink-182 obviously want to recapture, their golden years, the golden era of Tom and Mark and, you know, Travis, the one that everybody likes. In all seriousness, though, really, I do feel like One More Time is a wasted opportunity for Blink to do something new while also providing another plate of interesting pop-punk songs that don't necessarily fall in line with the complete deviation of sound that they saw in the post-Tom DeLonge era, except it kind of feels like that's a total miss here. They do have some of those older pop-punk styled songs, but they don't work, and then they do have some songs that go in a different direction, some more anthemic kind of songs, and they also don't work. Do you see where I'm going? I'm going to give this record 2 stars out of 5. With that being said, that is the end of this quick album review. I've been Zane from the Infinite Jukebox. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.